Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology podcast. Today I'm talking to you about Thor's hammer, which is an aspect pattern, following in our little series of aspect patterns. So far we've covered some of the more commonly known ones like the T-square, the Grand Cross and the Grand Trine. And maybe you've heard of the kite, maybe some of you have already heard of the kite, but today we are talking about Thor's hammer, which is a slightly more obscure, I say obscure, it's not obscure, it occurs, it's just something that perhaps not all of us are as well versed in because it involves some minor aspects, which are minor analytical aspects related to the square. Analytical meaning that they force analysis, I suppose. They force us to be analytical about our approach to things. Basically the Thor's hammer configuration is considered to be quite a volatile aspect. Now I am just looking on the Astro Wiki page because there's information about it here, and it's actually got the mythology, which I quite like because I'm really into Norse mythology actually. I mean, I say I'm really into it. I'm into mythology really. I'm really interested in it, but I am interested in Norse mythology, and I loved watching that TV series called Vikings. I don't know if anybody out there watched it, but I loved watching Vikings, and I really connected with it. And then I got I sent my DNA off I sent it off to two places, but the first place that I sent it to came back that I was like 67% Scandinavian, which I thought was really wrong. I was just like, well, I'll take it, I don't care, I can pretend to be a Viking, I'm a Viking. But yeah, actually I did one so that was with my heritage, and then I did another one with 23andMe, and when I did 23andMe it was a bit more specific. I went for like I invested in the more expensive thing and got like the health reports and everything as well, and it could tell you what strand of DNA was your earliest strand, what kind of like Neanderthal you are, and all sorts of things. Really interesting. So I don't know if the MyHeritage one was completely accurate, but if you think about the fact that I'm living in the UK and the Vikings managed to so successfully to invade and make their mark, it's not surprising that there are so many Scandinavians, people stemming from Scandinavians, but I also have, I believe, quite a lot of Celtic in me. So I've got a bit of Welsh, I've got a bit of Scottish. It was funny because it came back with all these different things, but it didn't come back with any English, and I was like, really? I don't have any English whatsoever. So that was the MyHeritage one, which I still don't know how much I believe that one, but the 23andMe isn't quite the same, but it's still very interesting, and probably a bit more, I can trust it more. It's a little bit more, my words escape me, honestly. Yeah, I just have to accept the fact that my brain just doesn't work the same way that it used to, because I'm, dealing with pregnancy hormones and all sorts, and apparently baby brain never goes away. You always have baby brain, so that's a nice thought, isn't it? Anyway, so Thor's hammer is an aspect. It's triangular, but it's not like an equilateral triangle. It's much more kind of looks like if you were to have a red flag. It's that kind of flag, that little arrow red flag, and it's not very easygoing. It's quite challenging aspect, and it's formed of two sesqui quadrates or sesqui squares, which are 135 degree angles, and connected at the base by two planets that are actually square to each other. So it would be, so for example, you'd have like Mercury square Saturn, and both of those planets could be sesqui square or sesqui quadrate Jupiter sitting at the top. The example that I'm looking at in Astro Wiki is the corner of the second house and the corner of the sixth house connected, and pointing up to the 10th. but yeah, in a kind of all like Placidus type of looking house system. But either way, it's the sesqui squares, the sesqui quadrate, which are the same thing, and the square are all challenging, hard aspects, all considered hard aspects. So you are left with a sense of discomfort with this one. And yes, Astro.com does go into the mythology, and the Norse god of thunder, Thor, who, well, obviously there's a lot of modern films out there with Thor in, lots of Marvel films with Chris Hemsworth, he's playing Thor. I wrote an article about him for the Star Sign Style for the that website, and yeah, he basically has a hammer, Thor's hammer, which is called Mjölnir. That's the best way I can pronounce it. And this hammer was, it was, what's the word? God, my brain is not working today. When they go into a forge and they forge down all these metals, and they created this hammer. These dwarves made this hammer, and it's like a boomerang. He can throw it and it can fly, but it always comes back to his hand. It's never too far out of reach. An amazing weapon to have. So literally he could fly if he wanted to fly, because he could use the hammer, the gravity from the hammer, to fling himself up into the sky, and he had to, it was like the hammer was part of who he was or is. So it says here, its characteristically short handle, a flaw, was due to a mishap during its manufacture, and it's considered to be a grinder and a crusher as far as a mythological weapon is concerned. So obviously it sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? It sounds pretty cool, but actually having sesqui quadrates in your chart, or sesqui squares, and squares are not, I mean, I wouldn't look at the chart and think, oh no, look at this awful aspect pattern. Not at all, I wouldn't. However, I would look at it and I would think that this presents a sense of discomfort for the person, the native, whose chart I was looking at, that is probably likely to have presented itself. You know, the sesqui square, the sesqui quadrate aspect of the 135 aspect is quite a low-lying aspect, which doesn't make itself too prominently known. But just like the kite, the opposition in the trine aspect, in the trine aspect pattern, that brings it more into fruition. It gives us more of a noticeable way to engage with something that is usually quite subconscious. And with the sesqui quadrates, yes, they are noticeable but easy to avoid if you want to. However, that square that kind of connects them at the base brings all of the planets in this configuration into a much more conscious expression in our natal charts. So it's considered to be extremely volatile, this aspect, and dynamic in the natal chart. According to Astrologically, it says children with a Thor's hammer may be very willful and hard to discipline, and adults may continue to act out their stressful feelings and rebel against society. They may attract a lot of criticism from others for their wayward behaviour. I know a few people like that. I think actually I was quite like that. I don't have a Thor's hammer in my chart. I was just a naughty little girl. But yeah, it's kind of related to other stressful triangles, including the T-square and the yod. Now, the Thor's hammer is definitely something that forces a sense of having to do things your own way, really. If you think about the fact that the square, all the aspects that are related to squares are very much Mars in their nature. If you didn't check out my episode on what are the aspects and how are they assigned their nature, it's probably a good one for you to check in and actually watch that one on YouTube, because I did an enhanced podcast episode for that. Now, this aspect is really one that the sesqui quadrate really isn't something that vies for our attention in a way that we are able to tap into it in a very conscious way always. It's there, it's under the surface, but it doesn't. It can go unaddressed for a long time. So the planets sitting at the apex of these two sesqui quadrates are going to struggle to. That planet is going to, well, it's going to be placed in a prominent position for when these two aspects that often are a little bit dormant in a sense, when they do get fired up, they are going to be definitely pushed into action. So really the way that we can imagine is if a planet was transiting, could be the moon, it could make it a little bit emotional for you. It could be that on a monthly basis, the the corners of those squares, of that square, those two planets that are square each other, are activated. On a monthly basis you're going to feel that, but actually on a larger scale, if you had like a social planet, a personal planet, or even a transpersonal planet activating some of this, it could really change the direction of your life, because these aspect patterns are also completely related to changes of direction. The sesqui square, the sesqui quadrate can really change the direction of your life, and it's not necessarily something that is perhaps so conscious. Perhaps it's just that something that's always brimming under the surface. It's always that thing that you should or could be doing, but when they are fired up by major transits, they can really be kicked into action. So yeah, this is definitely an interesting one, and if you've got one sesqui quadrate in your chart, it's worth exploring. But if you've actually got a Thor's hammer, I wonder if you were particularly difficult as a child, if you were very independent and very willful. It's interesting that it is connected to the mythology of Thor, because he himself was quite a willful character. He was very he's connected to the planet Jupiter, actually, which is interesting. In our archetypal mythological assignments of the planets, Jupiter is very much connected to god of thunder, Thor. I think it's interesting because he's not made out to be, in the films and in the mythology. Also, there's a book called Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, and he does talk about Thor as being not always the sharpest tool in the box. And I think actually the way that Chris Hemsworth plays Thor in the films, they are very silly. I think it is a very silly depiction, but I think that there is an element of, Thor is connected to being quite a he's a fun character, but he's also incredibly moody. He's a bit like Zeus, or who's the other one? Who am I thinking of now? I can't think of his name. Zeus, Thor, and I can't remember the other one. Either way, they're kind of connected to sort of like mood swings and being very manic depressive or bipolarish, actually. So they can be extremely fun and great and uplifting to be around, or they can be a total drag. I think that possibly that kind of volatile nature also is connected in this way to this aspect pattern, that kind of temperamental, volatile nature. So actually, I thought I'd have a little look. I know this isn't a particularly long episode, but I just wanted to cover it. Now, Ali B, where are you, Ali? We talked about Ali a lot in the earlier episodes. I've just got all my charts printed out here. Where are you, Ali? I did have a look at everybody's chart and scanned to see if I could see anybody with a Thor's hammer. And Ali does have one. Where are you, Ali? There you are. Where are you? Yes, you do. So Ali has got Chiron involved again, always getting involved, isn't he? Chiron at 29 Aries, and then she's got Saturn and Mars at 27 and 28 of Cancer. So there we go. We've got that square, the base of the hammer, which is the in two cardinal signs, and then the tip of the hammer is it looks as though it's Neptune in conjunction with the midheaven, sitting in Sagittarius at the top there. It might be that it's slightly, I think that you're only using an orb of about 2 degrees for a sesqui quadrate or a sesqui square. However, it is tied close. Neptune is quite close to the midheaven, so I'd be inclined to lump that in. So yeah, it looks very, it's very much definitely there as well. So this could be somebody who is difficult to control in the workplace, have a real sense of what they need to do and how they need to do it. As we've said here, they're very willful and hard to discipline. Were you a very willful and hard to discipline child, Ali? I'd be curious to know. Actually, what's really interesting is that Ali has got Pisces rising and Neptune is the ruler of her ascendant. So Neptune sitting at the apex of this Thor's hammer probably makes this configuration really important in her chart. It definitely seems like she's working with an awful lot of challenge in her life through her relations with other people. She's got a stellium in Taurus. She's got Jupiter. Her nodes are involved as well here. So she's got Jupiter, South Node, Venus and Sun in Taurus. And then Mercury is in Gemini. She also has, like I said, Chiron at 29 Aries. But opposite all of that stuff sort of clumped up at the bottom of the chart, she's got her moon in Scorpio in conjunction with the North Node and also Uranus in Scorpio as well. So she's got a seesaw of planets there. So that obviously with that opposition is going to be inviting, opposition into her life through other people, relationships, and that kind of thing. But also she does have this very, like we've already discussed, this very volatile Thor's hammer configuration in her chart, which, relates that Mars and Saturn with Chiron. Now, I have to say, I'm somebody who has a Mars-Chiron square. My Chiron is in Taurus. My Mars is in Aquarius, whereas Ali, you've got 29 degrees Aries, Chiron, and Mars at 28 of Cancer. So slightly, it's different, obviously. However, I'm just curious to know, because you're a Taurus as well, when you're getting run down, do you get a sore throat? Because I always know when I'm pushing myself too much, because I start to feel it in my throat, and that's when I know I have to take my foot off the gas and take a bit of a break. But anyway, yes, so this is interesting because the relationship between we've got a relationship between Chiron and Neptune by sesqui quadrate because they're both in fire signs. However, we've got cardinal fire and mutable fire. However, the standout for me is that we've got the cardinal water at the other base of the Thor's hammer, which has no relationship with mutable fire at all. It's related to Aries in the sense that they're both cardinal signs, so that they can relate to that getting stuff done and that cardinality and that instigative quality of cardinality. But then you have it feeding up into mutable fire, which is quite, I think it's difficult to have Neptune on the midheaven. Speaking as somebody with Pisces in my 10th house, Pisces ruling my 10th house by equal, it's a bit, it can be a bit chaotic. Like work can be a place where, having structure and routine can be a bit difficult, and there needs to be freedom to just go with the flow. And especially if you've got Neptune in mutable fire, and you're sitting, it's similar Pisces principles. It's very compassionate and needs to do something very giving and something meaningful with their work. So it wouldn't surprise me actually if what you do career-wise isn't in some way. It could be with this configuration that you ignored it for a long time, and actually you tried to do different types of Neptune maybe. Without actually sort of tapping into the message, which is easier to ignore because it's not such a square energy. So a little bit easier to ignore that, at points when you've had major transits, like maybe when you had Saturn transit Neptune, when Saturn was moving through Sagittarius, that was when Trump was talking about building a wall. Hang on. let's have a look and see when you'll have had Saturn moving over that point in your chart, which I believe was probably not 2016, yes. So yeah, maybe in November 2016, and maybe there may have been a couple of other points where it moved back. You may have had a crystallizing moment where you kind of thought, I need to, your whole life may have changed direction a little bit at that time, just because it's the ruler of your ascendant, Neptune, sitting at the apex of that Thor's hammer. Sorry, that page turning was me with my big fat ephemeris. And yeah, Neptune being your chart ruler, the ascendant ruler, therefore the chart ruler, makes it a very pivotal planet in the chart, that when you get transits to that point, especially things like Saturn and some of the outer planets which force you into making changes, and forcing you to address issues perhaps that you could probably normally ignore. It's kind of like, it makes me think almost, it's like that thing where people kind of just go along with what other people want them to do. So it's like, oh, I'm doing this job, and it's a credible job, and I'm doing this because people, it impresses my parents and they're happy, and it makes them proud to tell everybody that I'm, I don't know, a lawyer, or they're proud to tell people that I've graduated in this area and I'm now going to be working as in the civil service, doing something respectable, but actually, for somebody with Neptune in Sagittarius sitting in the 10th house, there needs to be something really meaningful, doing something compassionate. Oh, I can hear Lana at the door meowing. Bloody cat. She just can't stand a closed door. But yeah, you have to do something compassionate, something meaningful, something that's really going to make a difference, and maybe give back to humanity in some way. And as you have a Pisces ascendant, that's probably your kind of modus operandi anyway in your outlook, but perhaps the career aspect has been a little bit harder for you to find that kind of outlet. But yeah, aspects, transits, planetary transits to that point in your chart will probably have crystallized if it's Saturn. Uranus may have had something to say about it, but actually that may have been a slightly later transit for you. You may have been a bit younger at that point, because you've got Uranus at 4 Scorpio, so it would have taken a while to get there. But you may have had, a few bigger transits which have really woken you up to that area of your life, and in turn spoken to your natal Chiron in Aries, which is kind of frightened of pursuing its own path actually. And in your second house of values and earning potential, it could be that actually, you're scared of walking your own path because you're scared of Miss Taurus is a little bit worried about not having that financial stability in order to do so. And also square that stuff in your 5th house, which is probably this calling to do something that you're passionate about, something you really care about. It's maybe something that you love doing, that really ignites that flame within you, that just, that our passions and our hobbies and the things we love to do are kind of, that's sitting there in your 5th house being triggered whenever you have a transit to any aspect, any point of your Thor's hammer. So I'd be really curious to hear about your Thor's hammer. If you do, get in touch and let me know. You do also have another sesquiquadrate in your chart, Pluto sesquiquadrate. Is it your sun as well? Gosh, so you've got a couple of what you might say are challenging aspects that you are probably not necessarily unaware of completely. You've probably dealt with some tricky challenges in your life, particularly, like I said, with that huge seesaw of planets. There's definitely relationships are part of it. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear, Ali. And yeah, that's kind of it. I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Hopefully it's me talking around it has helped you to connect with Thor's hammer a little bit. It's definitely a lesser known aspect pattern. There's a really good little description in the Astrology for Dummies book, which is written by Ray Orion, which is one of the ones that I've recommended on my beginners resources. And it says here, astrologers have invented all kinds of additional aspects, most of them variations on those described above. She talks about the T-square, the grand cross. I'm assuming it's a she, don't know why. A grand trine. So those are the major ones, the T-square, the grand cross, and the grand trine. And then mentions the yod, the finger, like the yod, which is also known as the finger of fate, the hand of God. Those are kind of like the main ones. But then Ray Orion goes on to say, there are kites, castles, cradles, mystic rectangles, pentagrams, trees, wedges, trapezoids, and a series of 60-degree angles called a grand sextile, Star of David, or Seal of Solomon. There's a hammer, a butterfly, a warrior, a variation of the yod called a boomerang, and more. But it's not necessary to know every possible combination. Start with the grand trine, the grand cross, the T-square, and the yod. For quite a long time, maybe forever, that should be sufficient. So these are just ways to, explore the chart in a deeper way, but they're definitely not like, I wouldn't say start in this area, like don't get started here and get hung up on these really challenging aspect patterns. Just be aware of them because obviously the way to connect with your chart in the best way possible to understand yourself and other people is to explore planets transiting these points and see what gets triggered and see what fits that kind of feeling that's being described by the aspect relationship between planets. So hopefully you found it useful. Don't forget I've got a Patreon page. Come and join me over there. I do create video content for my subscribers on my Patreon page, and I've also got my YouTube channel, so please come over and subscribe and check out some of the enhanced podcasts that are coming on to my YouTube channel. And hopefully I think that's everything. I think I've covered it all. I'll be moving on next to the next aspect pattern, which, as mentioned in this episode, is the yod. Okay, take care, guys. Bye now.